Hello and welcome to today's presentation of the Data Puzzle, pulling it all together. Our presenter today is Jared Preisler of DataMaster USA. Jared Preisler has been in the appraisal industry for 20 plus years. He earned his SRA designation in 2011 and AIRS designation in 2018 from the Appraisal Institute. In 2014, he became a certified instructor for the Appraisal Institute. He serves as the secretary on the board of directors for the AI Utah chapter. Jared is also an AQB certified USPAP instructor. He has served as a board of trustee and vice president of the Utah Association of Appraisers since 2010. In addition to his role as the chief appraiser and director of product development for DataMaster USA, Jared is an active independent fee appraiser and owner of J. Leland & Company. Jared has developed several CE courses for the real estate profession in his capacity with UAA and as board member of the Appraisal Institute Utah chapter. Prior to becoming an appraiser, Jared earned his Bachelor of Science degree from Weber State University. He has owned a remodeling and construction company, owned and managed 64 rental properties, sold plastic injection molding, and managed a truck rental company. And with that, we are ready for Jared to begin. So Jared, it's all yours. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Lori. As I listen to that, I feel older and older all the time. And some of you were on earlier as we were talking about this morning in our household. My youngest daughter, Mackenzie, our youngest, started her senior year of high school, which helps me feel even a little bit older. Good morning and afternoon soon, maybe for some of you across the country. I am so excited to be here and grateful for the opportunity that McKissock has given me to talk to you a little bit about data and something that I'm a little passionate about. I'm a little nervous, and so hopefully that the nerves won't show through as we get started here. Also, I think one of the things that I wanted to mention pretty quick here in the beginning is just that I hope, I was thinking about this as I was preparing, that each of you are safe and well, that your families are safe in this unusual appraisal environment. Many of your markets are reacting probably much differently than you thought, and so I hope that you are all very successful and very safe. One of the things, just to begin and get started, there's a disclaimer that any of the presentations that I give, DataMaster requires me to make. So I'll start with that. This presentation was developed by myself. It doesn't necessarily represent the views of DataMaster. DataMaster does not endorse or promote the use of any specific type of report or report form vendor. And then DataMaster is a software program, a tool developed by appraisers for appraisers to more efficiently move data. DataMaster always keeps the appraiser in control of the appraisal process and the data used. DataMaster provides the right data at the right time so the appraiser can make the right decision. So with that out of the way, we're going to talk a little bit today about data. Some of the things that maybe are important for you to remember. For some of you, parts of this will be a refresher. For some of you also, I hope that you can take away at least one or two things to improve your business, to improve your work files, and to make your life a little bit easier as you navigate through the changing world of information that we have. I wanted to start off with an analogy of comparing the appraisal to a puzzle. I really enjoy doing puzzles and figuring out and putting them together. It's something that our family enjoys and has done quite often around the holidays and on the weekends. So if you can think a little bit about how you might assemble a puzzle. A lot of times the best way to assemble a puzzle is to start with the edges of the puzzle at the corners and kind of start building the puzzle from the outside in. And we can think of the appraisal process as individual pieces of puzzle, individual pieces. They're made up of data. The exterior edges of those are maybe made up of our appraisal theory, our best practices, USPAP requirements, proven methodology. And then finally, as we present our report to our client, that's the final picture of the puzzle as it all comes together. So think about that as we kind of go through this morning or the first part of this presentation. The next, so as a launching point, I throw this number 284 out, and if we were live, I would ask you what you thought 284 means in the appraisal world. It is kind of a significant number. Often I've asked this question and had responses like, it's the average fee an appraiser gets for a 1004. That is not what it is. It's not the number of lines in a URAR or a 1004. It's actually the number of times that the word data is mentioned in the 2021 version of USPAP. That's a lot of times that data is mentioned. In fact, it's mentioned in terms of factual data, marketing data, cost data, sales data, rental data, test data, standardized data, factual data, geographic data, property characteristic data, analyzing data, reporting data, storing data, historical data, private data. There are even 18 instances of where we have references to just other data. And when we add the word information, which is also data, we actually come up with 923 instances. There's an additional 639 times that information is used. So you combine all that together, we're responsible for a lot of information and a lot of data as outlined in USPAP. So let's start and take a look at a definition of data. I found this definition a couple of years ago in the online Merriam-Webster dictionary, and I thought finally somebody was talking about the appraisal industry. They wrote a definition. This is what they say. Data is factual information as measurements or statistics used as the basis for reasoning, discussion, or calculation. Facts or information used usually to calculate, analyze, or plan something. It's information output. Number two is, sorry, get the PowerPoint going here again. It's information output by a sensing device or organ that includes both useful and irrelevant or redundant information, and it must be processed to be meaningful. That's one of the things that we do, is process that data and make sure that it's relevant and not redundant. And then finally, they end with this, that it's information in a numeric form that can be digitally transmitted or processed. You know, I thought as I read through this that this really describes our industry and what we do. What we do in analyzing and gathering data and applying it to our appraisal reports. All right. So with that in mind, I want to go back to the basics for just a second so that we all get on the same page when it comes to data in USPAP. With permission from the foundation, I asked them if we could use and refer to the valuation process. Some of you might recognize this this chart, not in the colored form, but in a black and white form. This valuation process is something that we learn or teach in the 15-hour USPAP class. And the very first part of it, step one, is defining that problem, defining what our problem might be. And so I want to look at that and set it back to our analogy as the basis for those edge pieces. when we start the process, we identify who our client is. We identify our intended use. Maybe the type and definition might become one of those edge pieces. We identify the relevant characteristics of the subject property or the assignment. We also have some extra, we identify the type and value definition. We have some extraordinary assumptions, hypothetical conditions. And as we put all of this together, we start forming the perimeter or the edges and the corners of our assignment. Then we move on to step 2, which is determining that scope of work. It's the appraiser's responsibility to determine and prepare the scope of work necessary, sufficient to produce a credible result. Next up is the data collection. Often we get into trouble with our assignments, or one of the places we can get into trouble is when we start collecting the data ahead of time, and we think we might know what's going to happen or what our assignment is, because we get in the habit of doing things so regularly and so often. We just start right in and we start gathering our data instead of going back to step 1 and step 2. This happened not too long ago with me. I had the assignment to do a condo 1073 for a purchase, and included in the assignment was the requirement to do an operating income and rent analysis for this particular project. And so I was just ready to go. I'm familiar with the project. Started pulling comparables, getting the inspection scheduled, all of those things that we do before we go out to the property. And happened to be that I have a great assistant in my office that pulls all of my zoning and legal information, gets the HOA stuff put together, all of those things. And as she was working on that, she asked the HOA manager how many rentals there were in the project. And the HOA manager replied back that there were 0, that they did not allow rentals in the project. Well, all of a sudden that changed our assignment. That changed the parameters. This particular client and the borrower, the buyer, could not buy this property as a rental. They needed to be owner occupied. And so we had to backtrack. Well, it ended up that my client was willing to pay us for the work that we had done up to that point, but then they canceled the assignment. And so it's important that we determine these, that we follow the steps and not just start gathering information ahead of, maybe ahead of time. So once we start gathering that data, we start working on the inside. Let's think about this as the inside of the puzzle. We go through and we maybe set up a search in our MLS. We start sorting through the results of that search. We start verifying the information that's there, analyzing, breaking it down. We're doing some maybe pre-analyzation where we're throwing out properties that don't have similar garage or bedroom or bathroom count. We're starting to assemble all of this information, but it really doesn't make sense yet. It just doesn't really fit in there. And then as we move through the process, we decide which applications, step number 4, which approach to value to apply. Are we going to do the cost approach, the sales comparison approach, the income approach as we start putting this together? Just as a reminder, step number 4, this application to the approaches of value, is covered in Standards Rule 1-4. And then next comes the reconciliation part. Step number 5 is covered in Standards Rule 1-6. And one of the things that's sometimes overlooked, and I would remind you of, is that Standards Rule 1-6A requires us to reconcile the quality and quantity of the data available and analyzed within the approaches to value. Sometimes we forget that we have to analyze the amount of data, or we have to reconcile and report to our client in that reconciliation what type of data we had access to, and the quality of it. I work in a non-disclosure state, and so for us, one of the challenges is getting some verifiable, disinterested third-party information. And in a lot of my reports, in my reports, I'll mention that or talk about what the quality of the data and the limitations of the data that I might have. And you want to make sure that you have that in your reports as well. The second thing to remember with Standard Rule 1-6 in reconciliation is paragraph B, little b, which says reconcile the applications and the relevance of the approaches, methodology, and techniques to arrive at the value conclusion. So individually reconcile each of the individual approaches and then reconcile it all. And then the last step, step number 6, is to report what we have found. And in reality, for those of us that do a lot of lender work or a lot of more residential work, I think we're doing this along the way. As we're writing the report, or as we're gathering it, a lot of times the report is coming together and all the pieces are starting to fit together. And we do this, especially with the form software. We do it all simultaneously, and a lot of times as a seasoned appraiser, you might not think of them as individual steps, but they really are, and we should remember that process. So with that as a basis, and putting us all in the mindset of this process, we're gonna shift gears just a little bit, and we're gonna talk about data specifically. We're gonna talk about the 2 different types of data that are outlined in the Dictionary of Real Estate Appraisal, the 6th edition, which I believe is still the most current edition. And then we're going to look at the types of data, and then also identified are the sources of those data and the different sources that we might rely on. So the first is general data, and then the second type of data is specific data. And I should mention here, it looks like we have quite a few people on with us now. If you have some questions as we're going along, please feel free to put them in the chat box. We have several that are helping to monitor that chat box for me, and so if you have some questions, I can answer them as we go through the presentation, or if you have a question and you want to wait till the end, we should have some time at the end as well. So we have general data and specific data, and general data is defined as data that pertains to real estate values and information in general. More precisely, it's the data that relates to the 4 forces that affect real estate property values: social, economic, governmental, and environmental forces. This is known as a macro level data, and we're seeing the impact of this on markets in general drastically in the last couple of months, in the last 6 or 7 months. These are things like unemployment rate, certainly some of the social things that are going on, the pandemic, the COVID pandemic. All of these things apply generally to real estate values. We're seeing a shift in the way that we do appraisals, maybe some things that we hadn't seen before. We're asked to develop some techniques that maybe we didn't have before. Real estate agents are certainly showing homes and selling homes a little differently. Closings are a little bit different. The information that's being relied on and the way that folks are viewing homes is shifting. Other examples of general data would be things like unemployment statistics, neighborhood demographics, population growth or decline, purchase power in the real estate. So with the rates dropping quite a bit, how has that impacted values in general? And then as we get to specific data, to maybe a specific assignment, but in general, do the buyers have more buying power as interest rates decrease? Also, things might be, you might be in an area where you have seasonal, you have seasonalities. So I practice in Utah and live and work in Utah. And from the winter to the spring, summer selling season, we generally see a bump in values, a bump in activity. Our absorption rates increase as more buyers come. The days on market decrease. Inventory levels change. So those are all things that are in general. And then we have specific data. Specific data pertains to details about the property being appraised, comparable sales, rental properties, relevant market characteristics. This is known as micro level. One of the things that I would caution with both specific and general data is that it's very important to understand and recognize the source of the data that we're using and the motivation behind that data. Not all of the data that we use or that we gather is intended for appraisers. Not all of it was gathered for a use that maybe our client or our customers might have. Maybe their motivation behind that data or gathering it is very different, and we need to be cautious of that, especially now as we have so much more data. When I started appraising almost 25 years ago, most of my time was spent trying to find the data, gathering it, out talking to real estate agents in their offices, maybe down at the courthouse, trying to gather information. Now the gathering part is very simple. We have lots of access to huge amounts of data. And even in more rural areas, they're online, and the information is being put into databases and aggregated so that we can have access to it. The challenge now is not getting the data, but sorting through and verifying it and seeing if it's relevant. So let's look real quick at the primary and secondary sources of data. The Real Estate Appraisal Dictionary defines or talks about primary source of data as information that's gathered in its original form by the analyst. Some of us think that means that when we go out and search the MLS, that we're the analyst and we're gathering that information. It's primary, we're the primary source of that. And that's not correct. The MLS listing data that we're looking at was actually gathered by another source. We didn't generate the listing. It was the listing agent or the listing broker that generated that. So even MLS information would be information that comes from a secondary source. Usually the primary source of data is going to be when I'm at the property, I'm inspecting the property, or maybe I'm inspecting the neighborhood, or I'm generating a particular survey about maybe an adjustment. Secondary data, of course, is just the opposite. It's information that's not gathered in its original form by the analyst. Examples of secondary data, we've already mentioned one, would be MLS information, public record information. It's important to know when it was gathered and why it was gathered, and why should I really even care about this? Why is it important today? We're going to look at a case study here in a few minutes about, and I'm going to show you why you should care. More and more of the information that we rely on is from secondary sources. We don't have control of that. We don't know how it was generated. We're going to look at three different things right now. We're going to look at public records and MLS data, and then at a case study. And it looks like we're doing really good on time. When I talk about public records, I'm going to lump them together. There's really two different aspects to public records. One, you have the recorder's office, and that's where the warranty deeds, the ownership transfer, documents are recorded for that particular property. And those are generally updated pretty regularly. That information is pretty reliable and can be found pretty easily. The second side is that information that comes to the assessor's office. And as I travel around the country and talk to appraisers, a lot of them talk to me about the challenges that they have with their public records. Frankly, a lot of appraisers complain that the public records are no good, or that they're inaccurate, that they're hard to get. And I think some of that is the way that we look at that information, and some of it's our expectations. One of the things that I think of when I hear that also is that it's our job security. If those records are not readily available, or they have to be processed to be meaningful, and we're the ones processing it, then it means that we have some great job security. It's also why geographic competency is so important. I know my markets very well, but I don't know your markets very well at all. I probably wouldn't even be able to find myself or find my way into the assessor's office, or find the builder's card, or whatever it might be called in your particular area. But one of the things to think about as we jump online and we look at this data that comes, really there's only a couple of national data feeds, 2 or 3 that I know of. They're sometimes augmented with some regional information, and often if I find information not correct in one national feed, it's not correct in the other. It's equally incorrect. We think of companies like the big ones, CoreLogic, FirstAm, Black Knight. Those are the main aggregators or collectors of the national public records. And so understanding where each of the pieces comes from helps me to understand where I need to verify. So let's think about the example of a building permit for a particular property. Take an addition, for example. Most of the time, it's the city or the township that issues the building permit. So the homeowner is going to go and they're going to apply for this building permit to do an addition on the back of their house. They do the addition, and the city signs off on that building permit, and it is housed or kept in the city system. A lot of cities only transfer additional information or changes to the property on an annual basis in a batch format. And so if that permit was pulled, say, in November, and the work started the following spring in April, and it took 5 or 6 months to complete it, and then the property was signed off sometime, or the permit was signed off sometime in the fall. and then the batch process got behind a little bit. It might get into this December's batch to the county assessor, or it might not. Maybe it goes another year. And then once it does get to the assessor, the county assessor, how long does it take for the assessor to actually update and edit that information? So you could find yourself looking at an MLS listing where the agent listed the property as having, you know, I don't know, 1,700 square feet, when the county record shows that it only has 1,200 or 1,300 square feet. You can see from from the photos that there was an addition done, and you know, because of the process and how that information was transferred to the county record, that it could be significantly behind, and maybe the MLS is correct. In any case, you're going to want to do some additional digging in and figure out what the difference is. Could it have just been that the permits are behind? Another example that I find where the information might not be relevant or up to date in the assessor, and most of these are on the assessor side, not the recorder side, would be the assessed site value. I know that there are software programs out there, there's tools out there that use the site value as a determination of the value, and I've even seen appraisers put that in their reports as saying, I relied on the assessor's site value. Whether that's appropriate or not is a discussion for a whole nother topic another day. But think about if the assessor is their role or their motivation behind assigning a site value is just to determine in an ad valorem value to make sure that there's equity in that taxation between similar properties. Their lien date might be the 31st of December at midnight. They could have used data that was 18 months old. And so that site value might be as many as 24 months old or not relevant. So that's why their site value might be very different. We usually see the assessor's values significantly different in times when the markets are changing drastically or rapidly. Also, their motivation behind that ad valorem value is very different than the task that we have in doing a current market analysis or determining a market value for that home. Many of the ad valorem values are dictated by state tax laws and taxing agencies. And so when people say to me, well, your value, you know, my property value should always be 20% higher than the county value because the county value is always 20% low. They don't really understand what's going into that site value. And so those are just some things to think about as you start focusing on the public record. Any questions about that? I'm probably hitting stuff that everybody kind of knows, and we're just refreshing or jogging your memory. The next thing that I want to talk about is the MLS data. At DataMaster, we interact with about 85% of the MLS data across the country on a very intimate back-end access and relationship. And we get to see a lot of data. And so we have some experience with this. The MLS is most likely your most used secondary data in the appraisal process. I think that for most of us in the residential world, the MLS data is probably the data you rely on most as from a secondary source. It's often the primary information that is used by the buyers to make their purchase decision. So it's very relevant. It's what they use as they're sorting through and making a purchase decision. So knowing the rules and the regulations of your MLS will help you comes to understanding what you should be verifying and how to verify that information. And I'm going to share with you a couple of things that maybe you're not familiar with some of the MLSs and their rules. But first, who is it that owns the MLS listing data? When you go and look at the information that's been compiled, who's the owner of that? Is it the property owner? Is it the MLS board or the system itself, the people that wrote the back-end software that houses it, the database? Who is it that actually owns that information? Many people are surprised to find out that it's actually the broker that owns it. And why is it important to understand that it's the broker that owns it? The broker decides everything about that listing. They have control as to where it's advertised, how it's advertised, who gets to see it, the information that's put in, the level of verification that goes into that. If they're a discount broker, maybe it might be a little bit different. There are two primary purposes for an MLS. According to the National Association of Realtors, there are two primary purposes. The first purpose is cooperation between brokers. That means really to us advertising. What it means to the brokers is that all brokers who are participants or members of that MLS have access to the listings at exactly the same time. You can't hold a listing and only give it to your golf buddies or only give it to those that you want to, that are friends of yours as agents. The very first purpose is to make sure that everyone can see that listing at the same time. The second is something termed the unilateral offer of compensation, or in other words, commissions. So the two purposes of the MLS are advertising and commissions. So with that, understanding that that's the mindset, we can understand a little bit more about the information that's on the MLS. Let's look a little bit at the rules and regulations and what some of the terminology might be. For example, I've asked this question to lots of folks around the country. We all know what DOM means, days on market, but sometimes we get a little confused as to what C days on market means, or CDOM is what it's referred to. And our confusion has a pretty good foundation. Every MLS or many MLSs define this very differently. And so as you refer to CDOM in your market might be very different than what it is in my market. And so there's a reason for the confusion, and it goes back to how the MLSs define it. So in your MLS, is CDOM cumulative days on market? Or is it the contract days on market? Or it might be contingent days on market. It might be continuous days on market. Sorry, I said those out of order. And so knowing the meaning of CDOM has pretty big impact or implications when you're determining things like exposure time, marketing time, absorption rates. For your particular area, if you don't understand what CDOM means, you might be interpreting that chart that was provided or the data differently than what reality is. Some MLSs will let an agent restart an MLS listing, and that restarts the CDOM. Some of them, it doesn't restart those because it's the cumulative days of all the MLSs on a market. In my particular MLS, a property has to be off the MLS or expired or withdrawn for at least 90 days before the CDOM restarts. So it's important to understand and know what that means. What's the policy for editing a listing? So we have a a good example here that happens and causes a lot of frustration within the industry because their editing policy might be different. Can facts be edited or updated or changed prior to the under contract status? Or can they be updated at any time or never updated? Can listings only be changed after it's closed or sold? In my particular market, none of the information in the listing can be changed after it goes under contract. So for example, let's say we have this property that's listed for $275,000. It's 1,500 square foot. This is the listing information. It has 425 square feet of basement. The year built was 1980. The lot size was quarter acre. It's got 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, and a 2-car garage. But then the appraiser sent out, because it quickly goes under contract, it has several different offers. The appraiser finds that instead of it being 1,500 square feet, it's shrunk somehow to 1,250 square feet. It only has 350 square feet in the basement. And the 1-car garage, it was really a 1-car garage that was double deep at best, and maybe not even double deep. And so instead of being a 2-car garage, it was a 1-car garage. So now the listing agent, they agree not to buy it for $275, but to transact at $260. So it looks like the market might be declining for this particular property, but in reality, there was some factual information that was different. In my market, the MLS listing agent cannot change the listing to reflect what the appraiser found when they went out and did the appraisal. This causes a lot of issues and things that we're trying to get changed across the country. But this helps me to focus when I see something like this as to what happened, call the agent, find out where the discrepancy was, and be able to clean up my data. One of the other things that we want to look at from a policy standpoint, and this will have a great impact on your work file, is the policy that the MLS has with the listing photos and that photo retention. Will the photos always be available? Is there a time limit? I think, Lori, we have a link that we can put in for the participants here on a recent Washington Post article that was titled, "Do you have the right to have the photos of your home removed from a realty site after the sale of the property?" The article details a lawsuit in which the property owner won, and the obligation is there for the big realty sites to remove those interior photos from the internet or from their database. Well, what's the implication for us as appraisers? If you relied on those photos to make your determination of your quality and condition, your Q's and C's, and maybe 3 or 4 years from now, the state comes and asks you how you made that determination, and you said, well, I just looked at the photos that were in the MLS. And they said, great, show us your work file. And you go to pull up that listing, and those photos are gone. Now your work file doesn't contain everything that it needed to contain to produce a credible result. In fact, in the record-keeping rule, we find that your work file must include all other information, data information, and documentation necessary to support the appraiser's opinion and conclusion and to show compliance with USPAP, or reference the location of such other data, information, and documentation. So in the past, I think most of us have just considered that, well, it's in the MLS, and I printed out that listing. I have that list number, so I'm okay. But now I don't have an agreement with the MLS to always make those photos available for me. They can do whatever they want to with them. So my work file might be inefficient. or deficient of information that is necessary. In fact, FAQ 82 kind of details and talks a little bit about this, talks about what should be in that work file. And the reason why we have a work file, one of those reasons is to facilitate enforcement, to aid the appraiser in handling questions from the client or intended user, and to preserve the evidence of the appraiser's compliance with USPAP, and to contain all the information required to support the appraiser's opinions and conclusions. And so in summary, I hope that you kind of go back and look through and see, is your work file, does it really have all the information that you've been gathering online or in a digital form? Do you have a way of archiving that information? Do you have tools at your that are readily available for you to be able to recreate or have a complete work file? We have to rely on general and specific data. It's necessary for the appraisal process. We also have recognized that these other sources might not have our same intentions or motivations, and that the data might be different or intended to be used differently. Our challenge today is to understand where the data came from, what it was or was not intended for, any of the limitations. Basically, what's the motivation behind that data, and then apply the correct appraisal principles or theory. All at the same time while remembering to preserve and maintain our work file in its original state. I thought that, well, let me end this section with this final thought. Not all data is created equally. One of my favorite quotes is that attributed to Albert Einstein, and I don't know if he really said it. I wasn't there at the time. But he said that not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. I think in our world, in our profession, this is really true. And there's a lot of times when you walk into a house and you know that there's something that is either of value or has a detrimental impact on the value, but it's really hard to quantify that. And so, and then there's other things that we can count that really don't matter at all. I mean, I remember back in the day I would count fruit trees, and that really doesn't matter anymore. Wood stoves in my area, they certainly are listed in the MLS, but they don't have a place in my market anymore. The market's moved away from those. And so not everything that we can count should be counted or counts in the marketplace. So I want to share with you and tie all of this together with a case study. And in this case study, it's going to really highlight the motivation between some data and what the implications might be. As I introduce this, I don't want you to get caught up in the actual adjustments or the numbers, the theory or methodology, but I want you to look at really the primary source for the information that was behind all of this. So in this case study, and we have about 10 minutes, I'm going to wrap this up probably in about 6 or 7. And then if you've got some other questions, we can answer those as well. But this was my assignment. This is a real case study, not made up. I was asked to do a field review. The property was a single-family residence. The issue became the location adjustment for me. There's a multiple regression tool was used to determine this adjustment. This is kind of what the house looked like. It was just a pretty basic house on a very normal, regular street in a town where there was a lot of information. The location adjustment, as you can see from the report, all of the classifications were neutral residential, but then there were a bunch of adjustments, and those adjustments are what cued me in or focused me on looking at this issue. there were some comments in the report that said that the location adjustment showed a statistical significant difference. The adjustment was based on a regression analysis model. The analysis of the neighborhood was done by the elementary school boundary, which are the smallest reliable geographic boundary available in the MLS. And then it says all adjustments are based on the regression model. The market analysis of mean values is used as a secondary support. And so I've been appraising in this area for a long time, and I have never considered an elementary school as a determining market factor. And many of you might be in markets where absolutely 100% the elementary school makes a difference. And you might want to select all your comparables from the same elementary school district. But in Utah, we're in an open school district or scenario where I can send my child to any school I want to. I just have to get them there if the bus doesn't run. And so this really became very unusual to me. So here, this was provided as the model output. It was in the addendum in the back of the report. And under the elementary school, it said $4,539. It didn't really tell me very much about what that should be applied to or how it should be applied. So I started digging in, and I found that with this particular regression tool, they used an API from a website called Schooldiggercom. Now, this is a real website. It's a real tool. They've been collecting data for a lot of time, a lot of years. I think on their website it now says 15 years. They analyze about 136,000 schools across the country. In Utah, they rank 527 schools, elementary schools, at least once a year. And I was very surprised to find this information. So I'll come back to School Diggers in just a second. I want to show you what the adjustments were and which elementary schools each of these properties went to and what the difference was. So the subject is at the H. Guy Child School, as well as our comparable number 6, which happened to be an active listing. Somehow, as I outlined this, as I laid this out, I couldn't figure out if $4,500 was supposed to be for a 100 rate ranking difference or for 50 or for whatever. And so I went into Schooldigger.com and I found the ranking of each of the elementary schools. And then I applied the adjustment that had been put in the report. And there were some inconsistencies, like comp number 2, you can see Shadow Valley had over a 200-point better rating, but really only received a $4,500 adjustment. In my mind, that should have been a $9,000 negative adjustment if we were going by 100s, which is what it seems like the other ones were. So then I looked at a map, and I started putting each of the comparables on the map with their adjustment. And it made no sense to me because they were in 3 different cities when really we needed to all be in the same city. Comp number 4 was on a very busy street and actually had a plus adjustment. That made a little bit of sense, but comp number 1 was not on a busy street, got the same adjustment. Comp number 2 or 5 also not on a busy street, same adjustment. The ratings didn't equal up to the adjustment, so there were a lot of questions here. So I found a couple of additional comps, bringing the total to 7 sold comparables, 8 comparables, the 6 original and then 2 of my own. There were 14 agents I could reach out to. A couple of them were duplicate agents. 10 of those agents called me back. And the question that I asked them was, if the elementary school had been part of the discussion of either listing or buying or selling the home. And most of the agents know me fairly well. This is in my backyard. And most of them laughed at me, asked me why I was asking that question. that, of course not, the elementary school didn't matter. The high school might matter, but not the elementary school. Except one agent. One agent did tell me that she wanted to go to a specific school, and it was the Marlon Hills one. And that's because she worked at the school and she wanted to walk with her kids to school. So my conclusion in the end was that the impact of the market value feature, like the location, it doesn't change on an annual or biannual basis, semi-annual basis. Therefore, that ranking doesn't change that often either, and it wouldn't be an appropriate indicator of value. But what I found even more disturbing was not only that the real estate agents, they agreed with my assumption. I dug in a little bit deeper to Schooldigger.com, and I found that the rankings that they use to produce this API, that within their ranking, there were several different things that they used. Number one was the test scores. Number two was the student-to-teacher ratio. Number three was the ethnic makeup of the school, the diversity, the ethnic diversity. And the fourth one was the number of free lunch recipients, the number of free school lunch recipients. And to me, I was very uncomfortable using data that had those types of matrix or parameters in determining the ratings of those schools for valuation purposes. Now, I gave this presentation not too long ago to a group of appraisers in California, and one of the appraisers came up afterwards and she said, I used Schooldiggers.com when we moved to the area. It was fantastic. It helped me to get a grasp on what the school districts were like and what was going on. And that was the perfect motivation behind this tool. And she said, but I would never have thought about using that information within a valuation assignment. It would have been inappropriate, even though for her and her personal life and her family, it was very much information that she needed. So pay attention to what the motivation is behind that data. Make sure that you're not using an API or a tool that has data in it that's really not intended for us. In the very end of the case study, I found there was some differences, but they really applied to being on the busy street and not which elementary school someone would be assigned to attend. So know the information behind the tool, the methodology behind the algorithm, test for reasonableness. Does it apply? Does it make sense? And then communicate to your client. So our time is about up. Thank you very much. This is my contact information. I can also be found on LinkedIn, Facebook. I do have a Twitter account. I'm not really sure how to do it, and Instagram. You can also contact me through DataMaster, which is available. You can find that at DataMasterUSA.com. Lori, do we have any questions out there? Anything that I've missed?
No, I think no questions that I see so far. If anyone does have one, they can pop one into chat real quick. But this was great, Jared. It was really helpful information, and I think all of our attendees really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Yeah, we can wait another minute or so, see if there's any questions.
We are going to provide some information for you. I'm not sure exactly how that's going to get out, but we should have a link to this information for you to keep in your reference material. I know it was a lot to go through in a short period of time, and I really appreciate your attention and the opportunity today.
Yeah, it was great. It was a great presentation. We really appreciate your time. We appreciate all of our attendees' time. I don't see any questions in the chat, so we can go ahead and sign off. And I just want to thank you for being here today, Jared, and thank all of our attendees, and thank you for choosing McKissock. Everybody have a great day.
Thank you.